Alex, some 13 years ago. Can you believe
My
that?
God.
I know, probably 14 now, when she was a competitor on the next Iron Chef and I was a judge. It was at that point I realized, quite frankly, how much I loved her food. It was this odd combination of French, Italian, American, and lots of other types of cooking. And that made her food so special, alongside her ability to make food, well, so constantly delicious. It always made me look out for all her food when judging. And I have visited Butter a number of times when I've been in New York. She was and is one of my favorite chefs on the planet. And trust me, I have met a fair few chefs.
Yeah.
Now, so many years later, I hopefully consider her a friend. And we
Yes.
have done so many shows and a number of events together. So it gives me the greatest pleasure to be able to invite her onto my podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Alex Guarnaschelli.
Oh,
wow.
wow.
I can't tell you, I'm so pleased that you're on my podcast, my humble little podcast.
I don't think so.
And what I was going to do now is just let's get a feeling for what you're doing now, and then we'll get into some of the kind of history of who you are and what you've done, because it's a really fabulous history you've got, because you've been to France, you've done other things, which I'll explain to people. But let's find out what you're doing now, because you've got a book and you've got all the shows you're doing. So give us a little bit about that first.
Well, I'm doing this kooky little show called Supermarket Stakeout, where chefs cook in a parking lot, and it's kind of grown into this, I don't know, exploration of Americana, because we're in a parking lot, and whether you realize it or not, a lot goes on in a supermarket parking lot in America, Simon. So
I've done it once. I've only done it once, but it's a great show. I know it's just an amazing. Yeah, it really is an amazing show.
Well, I like the playfulness of the competition and the resourcefulness that this recruits. The show that I developed with Brian Lando, Alex versus America, is obviously something I've been working on for years with him.
Yeah.
And so that's really, near and dear to my heart, since we can't seem to find Iron Chef America yet again. And then I have this other show called Chow House with Gabriele Bertaccini, who is a Tuscan native, and he and I went to Tuscany with a group of young chefs, and the prize for winning was actually working with a number of different chefs all around Europe. That was the prize for the winner, and I just thought it was great. But which kind of chefs were you going to work? Were they going to work with? Because I know a lot of the chefs there. Mostly through Italy, because I wasn't given the names. Okay. It was just lots of chefs in Italy, some in France. Oh. But I think really the funny little, I don't want to call it deceptive, but the twist of all this really was how much these chefs learned about themselves, one another, teamwork, and the great cruel humanity. And so it was sort of, first of all, fascinatingly Shakespearean, but also just, when you kind of say, like, the prize is the journey, and, that kind of stuff that you read, in those books that are by the toilet in your friend's house. And in all honesty, there was a lot of that went on. So I found that fascinating. And honestly, Simon, so did the viewer. Now, I will say you are the judge. You are not just a judge. You are the judge that everybody wants. And you are a magnificent translator and interpreter and compassionate, empathetic floor reporter for Tournament of Champions. Thank you. I say to all the chefs that go on the show, you gotta have Simon, It's like when you go to the movies, you're like, I got to have a Coke and popcorn. Nothing else will do, Simon. It has to be the tried and true classic. Well, I would give Justin my support as well. He's a fantastic, totally different from me. Too.
He's
Oh no,
totally different from me.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I think together we form a team.
Oh yeah,
And he, I'm my very straightforward person, and
yes,
he's a very witty person,
very
but very
clever.
witty, yeah, very clever. And I think together with Guy, we form a great team.
Oh yeah.
So, but he's an amazing person. Tell me about Cook It Up, because I know, and I want to ask you about this later as well. You've been talking with Ava, you've been working with Ava about this book, and she's contributed lots of recipes to it too. And I wonder how you was that coming from, and we'll talk about this now then. This coming from what your mother did with you and you were trying to do it there, or was it just this is my, this is my perfect person to work with because she's my daughter?
I would say neither. I
Oh,
mean,
really?
well, that's not this. I mean, you wouldn't be wrong, by the way. All of what you said definitely plays a part in the situation. But I noticed that, everybody says, "Oh, you're a chef. Did you teach your daughter how to cook?" I mean, it doesn't feel that way. Teaching your children your craft. It may work that way for a lot of people. It just doesn't work that way for me. I never wanted Ava to feel like she had to cook or anything of the sort. So some days she'd pop in the kitchen and be very interested in what I was doing. And some days she would ignore me and just come to the dinner table and eat dinner like any normal kid would. And I just thought, let me give this kid a chance to find food on her own a little bit and see how that goes. And she didn't cook much, honestly. She took an interest in food. We go places, whatever. She knows a lot. But then all of a sudden she'd say to me, "Oh, I'm going to make these kimchi pancakes because Hooni Kim made them in his book, My Korea, and I just think they're cool." And I'm thinking, how do you know who Chef Hooni Kim is? How'd you find the book? She also would come in the kitchen and say, "I'm going to make Gordon Ramsay's, beef Wellington because I saw it on TikTok." So there was a lot of different learning going on for Ava. She dabbles in a lot of different mediums and she makes a lot of her own food. And I said, would you like to do a cookbook, but really do a cookbook?
Yeah.
Not like I write the whole thing and then you act like you do part of it. So she said, "Yeah, but like I don't like the same things you like and you're a weirdo. So can I do my own lunchbox stuff and my own breakfast?" So I said, "Why don't we just kind of split the book up?" And she said, "Well, I don't want to make any desserts, but I want to make all the meat and all the fish." And so we just put it together kind of on her terms. I just didn't want this to feel like, that it was designed for a magazine piece and that isn't this a cute little multi-generational story about women that cook. My mother found food in her own way.
Yeah.
Her mother cooked. My mother did not cook growing up. And my great aunt would tell me stories about honestly what a disaster my mother was in the kitchen for years, but that my mother would always come over to her house, make a huge mess. Half the time it wasn't good. When my parents got married, they both had their little things that they cooked. But when my mom started working in publishing, she used cooking as a tool to edit her cookbooks. And she would cook her way through the book and write all the questions she had to the author as she cooked through it. And, people say there was no one like your mother. There is no one. And I'd say, yeah, well, it's like someone who could play all the instruments on a record listening to your music. That's what my mother ended up using as her process. And then Ava, I just thought I was a spectator to so much of my mother's cooking growing up. I think being a spectator to cooking in some form or another is underrated. I think it's a visual medium, and I think you have to watch for a while. You almost have to watch so long that you just amped and itching to get there and just burn your first omelet. And that's kind of what Ava does.
Which I still do.
Okay.
I have to tell you that when I met your mother, which is on this show called something like All Star Challenge, we did it once.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I met your mother, and I was, because I come from publishing and I worked in cookbooks, she was the only person I was petrified of.
Yeah.
Your mother was, she came in and she came to shake my hand, and I never worried about it with any of you chefs because you were, my people, as it were. And she came to shake my hand, and I was petrified. Just to tell people who she is, in case people here don't know, she published, The Joy of Cooking, which everybody, everybody. I have a copy, and where I'm from the UK, I have it in my house.
Yes.
And the Zuni cookbook, which I have in my house
Oh, I love
because I
that.
bought. And so from her to come to me, that was incredibly. She was very polite and very nice, and all of this, but
Well,
she was the one I was shaking about.
well, you got her on a good day, Simon. Go with God. Yeah, I mean, I would go to parties and people would say, "I know you. Your mother declined my book." I mean, that was kind of
Oh,
like, yeah. So I just kind of started introducing myself as Alex, if you know what I mean. Yeah, she was really something. But my mother would spend 9/10 of a moment in with her nose in a book and 1/10 of the time cooking. And
oh,
and my father would spend 10/10 just cooking and feeling his way around. And so I had
yeah.
two very different examples. But again, with Ava, I mean, I just think it's such a cliche or a classic, like, oh, mother daughter stuff. But honestly, I don't know. I felt like there was something to be said here at this point in her life. I don't think Ava will be a chef and watch they're going to play this in 10 years and laugh at me. But I really don't. I don't know. I think food is just something Ava will love and enjoy and something she can do that she's really naturally good at. So that's nice.
Well, what do you think she's going to do? I mean, that's a totally different question, but what do you think she's going to be before we move on to your
Yeah,
questions? Because
I
she's
think
a
she,
great girl. I mean, I see her on, Instagram and see her cooking with you, and and I've seen her growing up, and I'd love to see what she's going to do.
I don't know. I mean, I think she wants to be a journalist and she wants to write and be a writer. And I think, but she also really likes fashion. And I really don't know. And people say to me, isn't there a place where all those things intersect? And I say, no. In fact, I don't think so. I think she's got to pick something along the way. So I don't know. Simon, she may go to school for fashion and just end up working at a big fashion house or something. So I want you to be prepared that there may be very little food professionally cooked by my daughter in the world, and everybody's just going to have to deal with it.
I'm, well, that's great, but as a writer, I appreciate her love of writing.
Yes.
Um, so let's find out then how you got your entry into cooking, because with do have this wide variety of influences, even if they didn't impact you. So what is your entry into it? Because you went to France and you were,
Yeah.
I hate to say this, but you're one of the last people really from America who did go to France.
Yeah.
You, Marc Forgione, people like that went to France. So was that, why did you go to France in the first place when you
Yeah.
really brought most of your Italian and American cooking back home?
Yeah. It's funny you should say Marc Forgione because the first chef I ever worked for was his father,
Oh,
Larry.
yeah.
And Larry said, I worked at an American place
Yeah.
for about a
Oh,
year.
okay.
And Larry said, I could keep you here, and you could, 5, 10 years be the chef, whatever else. He said, why don't you go to France and just cook where the world is perfect? And I thought, okay. So I find it very interesting that you bring up his son because I'm sure he told his son a similar thing. So that was a big reason why I went because Larry, and that's like a very basic answer, but because Larry Forgione told me to. But also, my father was a European history professor and got a PhD in Yale in European history.
Wow.
So,
Okay.
and,
So
and
you
there
do come from a very academic family
oh
in
yeah,
a way. Yeah.
it skips a generation, Simon. In fact, I think
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Because I just want to say, when I'm talking about food with anybody, you're one of the few people who I know I said, but I can have a chat to about the history, about the things. I'm writing a book now about cakes, and it's going all the way, and you going from the ancient Egyptians all the way through to the modern day. And you're one of the few people I could have that conversation and would understand each of the nuances of each cake, as it were.
so
And
important.
yeah, oh no, absolutely. But you're one of the few people who could understand that. So I don't think it skipped a generation. But do tell me.
Well, let's just say, Simon, that My father was getting his PhD in European history at Yale, and my mother was getting a master's in Russian studies at Yale. And they met there and they got married in the chapel at Yale, which is so very nauseating to me. And I think, they were just voracious readers, voracious, both of them. They would read and then they would talk to each other and they wouldn't read the same thing. And then they would read more and then they would talk more. And they did that for 54 years. So I'm thinking they were onto something. But there was a bust of Napoleon on our dining room table, Simon. And I think it's important for you to know that I ate dinner every night looking at a bust of Napoleon, the one of him up on the horse. And then there was a giant poster of Napoleon in the dining room that hung facing where I would sit every night. And I always say this, like, it's important what you see as a child in your immediate environment. And, was he Italian? Was he French, Napoleon? Well, he was sort of a little bit of both. And so I think it's interesting that you describe my cooking as somewhat incidentally Napoleonic, but I don't think that was an accident, considering that there was this pulsating French flag fluttering in the dining room at all.
Why Napoleon?
My father was fascinated with Napoleon. It was his specialty, was Napoleonic warfare. So he went to all the battlegrounds. My parents spent the rent money traveling in France. I mean, that's what we did. We went to France. When I was 12, I ate at Joël Robuchon's Jamin on the Rue de Longchamp. I was 12 years old. Joël Robuchon came out and said to me, oh, you're 12. Do you like cooking? And I'm just looking at this guy thinking, like, I just want to go to a movie. Like, I don't care about this tomato crab millefeuille and this guy who has a 6-foot high hat. But that's what my parents were doing. And, I remember I fell asleep on the train and my father woke me up and he said, I paid a fortune for this scenery. Sit up. So, the French stuff was very important always. And I think I never thought much about it, to be honest. It was just the way things were. I'm sure you had plenty of things growing up that were the way they were, like a good doll. When you describe to me how you feel about a good doll, I'll say that Napoleon was my father's doll. And that, to get your parental blessing when you leave the house, people act like it doesn't matter. I think it did. And I said to my father, I'm just going to go. I'm going to apply to a cooking school as a work study student, and I'm going to go work in France. What I didn't know, Simon, was I went for about a year and a half. I lived in Burgundy and by the Alps, but then I was going to go home. And I met Guy Savoy, and I was working in his kitchen for free, and I got to meet him. And I don't know what happened, Simon. I don't know. He was a father like I never had. And I spent 6.5, 7 years just staring at him every day. It's hard to leave a guy like that.
It is. I mean, I never met him.
Right.
I've eaten at his restaurant. I know who he is, but I've never met him as close as you have. And for me, that again, he's someone who I would be like quaking if I was shaking his hand.
He's the nicest.
Really?
He's the kindest, nicest. I'm telling you right now, he's a man of the people. He would win like friendliest in the high school yearbook. Do you know what I'm saying? Simon, go for it.
Oh, I'm going to have to. So tell me, before we start going on about your cooking, I know from chatting to you that you went to Barnard, didn't you?
I did.
You studied, and I remember this from you telling me it was an art history course or an art. Is that right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, was that something? I mean, two things. Did that impact the cooking? Which is, I think it does. And did that like give you another career that you were going, or was that just something you were doing because you were happy doing it, if that makes sense?
Well, my dad said when you go to school, you should study some stuff that you like, and then you should pick a profession that you like. He said, because you're going to do it a lot. That's pretty basic, I know. But I don't think we really think about it much that way. I think we have allegiance to a lot of other things that can get in the way. But my father, my mom sort of worked more the 9 to 5, or I should say more like 8 to 8 shift.
Yeah.
So when I was growing up, strangely, my father made a lot of the weeknight dinners, and he would be home at odd hours because he was a teacher.
Yeah.
So he would say to me, let's walk over to the Met. We went, or the MoMA. I grew up in Midtown Manhattan. My father said, let's stroll over to the MoMA and look at the Picassos. And he took me through a lot of music. I know. Believe me,
I used to stroll over when I was a student over to the British Museum and go and look at the Rosetta Stone. I used to do that a lot, in fact. So I do get what you're saying.
Yeah. And I think I just liked that. I liked looking at the paintings with my father. He would ask me questions and I didn't know anything. And I think he enjoyed the freshness of my perspective because you know how that can be when someone just looks at something and reacts. But also, I think, understand this. My father was asking me, okay, what is, this Matisse? I said, well, it's a giant painting of a pink table. Like, how didn't he have anything else lying around? And my father would laugh. But my father was asking my opinion and then asking me to articulate my feelings about paintings. And then I would go home and my mother would cook dinner and say, how do you feel about this blueberry pie? Is it better than the one I made 5 years ago, which had more cornstarch but less sugar? And I think, honestly, Simon, that it was an accidental training to talk about food, which I think is actually my accidental real profession. I mean, Simon, if you had to write a business card for what you do, I mean, wouldn't it be sort of really the wackiest business card? Like, hi, call me, this is what I do. And I think mine would be equally odd, like accidental competition show cook, sometime judge, occasional therapist. I think it would be a lot of different things, but the art came from going to the museum with my father. And I think the food and the cooking really came more, but from my mother, but both. And I thought, well, I don't want to pick a major that's boring.
Yeah.
And there's nothing like, looking at paintings all day. We went to the museum. I took a class called Introduction to Connoisseurship in my senior year of college. And we went through the Met with the teacher picking out all the underpainting and the cracks and all the things. So every time I look at a painting now, I say to Ava, oh, can you see this was warped? And they fixed it and this and that. And she said, did this class skew your perspective about
love this
art? And I think it did. But the art and the food are not related to me, Simon, that I can see. I would love to tell you that I hear Mozart and I think Monet when I am making a bowl of soup, but it would be a lie.
Okay, well, that's very honest of you when you talk about that. So let's talk about your visits to different places, and let's talk about the difference between cooking in France, which at the time was probably it is and even is now very forthright. It's very I always say it was straight tokes and all of that kind of stuff. Then you came back to America. But tell me the difference between cooking for them. I wonder what that difference in culinary training, which you were still figuring from, and then let's take it from there, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, I worked for Guy Savoy. I worked for some other chefs intermittently, and he was I think he still is, but at that time, I would say he was I think he was more of a modern French chef. I think he had great allegiance to the classic techniques, a lot of them, obviously. But he was, sort of meddling and fiddling, and he would mix unconventional things together. He also was, I think, really big on humble ingredients, which I really, really resonated with me. He would make a whole dish out of cabbage 100 ways and then plop a scoop of caviar on it. Or he would make a big dish of braised lentils with butter and tons of black pepper and vinegar, which to me was kind of bold for France, black pepper alone. Like the French are all team white pepper because they don't want you to see it.
I love white pepper, I have to say. White pepper and black pepper. By the way, did you know black pepper used to be so expensive back in the Roman times, the ancient Romans, that it came from Taliceri and it was only kept for the emperors. And it was, well, they would bring it in. And people don't know this. We have it kept on the sideboard and we kind of throw it on whatever dish we're doing. And yet it was the most expensive ingredient on earth back in the Roman times. And it was, anyway, I'm giving you this.
I love that.
Yeah. And
Was it
so
also was the effectiveness of its preservative abilities part of that, or was it really the taste?
it was just the taste. The Roman emperors really, like the people now, they didn't know a lot about it. All they knew was it was expensive, so they must have it.
I mean, that's true now, isn't it?
Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to give you that because I
Didn't
think
know
that
that.
might, yeah. And same with salt, they used to give away salary. That's what the term salary became. And salt they used to give to the Roman troops because everywhere they went, they could trade the salt, a little block, and they'd get cattle for that, they'd get whatever. And that's where salary comes from. But anyway, sorry.
And also the expression, he's not worth his salt.
Absolutely.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I love a podcast where we learn.
Well, this is where I try and talk about, because I'm writing, I've written 4 essays for this season. So we've done corn, cakes, the chicken, which, by the way, had its relationship to the dinosaur, Tyrannosaurus Rex. I mean, it's all the, anyway, I'm sorry, I'm just giving you stuff
I love it.
but that's what I do about this history. And that's why I wanted you to come on and share this food history that came from, where you've come from, which is a very different relationship to a lot of chefs. Very different.
Yeah. I mean, I think honestly, I just knew that I didn't have the confidence. So I knew that if I had to go where the cooking was really good and do it over and over and over again until I do believe the power of repetition to me. I can't say enough about it. I like to tell people the same story over and over again. I think you learn by just even repeating the same story because you're looking at it from a different vantage point, or you need to talk about it again because you're working through something. And I just think the same is true with onions. You just have to cut them over and over again. Also, it was kind of interesting to, Larry Forgione is considered a pioneer of American cuisine and American ingredients. He's called the
Yes.
godfather of American cooking, although I think he and Jonathan Waxman and maybe even arguably someone like Bradley Ogden would share that
Wow.
title. And I often found myself at an American place, Larry would be there, and Jonathan and Bradley and whomever else would come in and they would be cooking with blueberries from Maine and, black trumpet mushrooms from Oregon. All of a sudden, the geography of the ingredients, I don't feel like in the 90s, I don't think it was nearly as prevalent as it is now. But the minute I started working in a kitchen, that geography was just part of what I was experiencing. So when I went to France, rice from the Camargue, right?
Oh,
True
yeah.
Perigord truffles, mussels, flown in from Lille. I mean, it really mattered where everything came from. And people would just come and drop these little buckets and leave, and you'd sort of look like, what was this dude doing? Like walking around the streets of Paris with a little 5-pound or 6-kilo box of porcini mushrooms that came on almost the same exact day every year. So I think the seasonality and the geography of the ingredients was something that just pulsated in the background for me. And then it became sort of part of my own personal language. Like, you would never serve asparagus in January. Why would you even think about a porcini dish if it is, So I think that got in my DNA pretty quickly. And so did all the classical French cooking that Guy Savoy was actually really doing. And that's what I learned. A whole separate conversation could be had about the social complexities of being an American woman in a 3-star Michelin kitchen in Paris. Not ideal, honestly. I look back on it probably far more romantically. I'm glad I was really young and that I could deal with it, but and people weren't, throwing me around. It wasn't like that, but it was just, they didn't let me cook anything for the first year I worked there. So I wasn't allowed to go to the stove or turn the burner on or put a pot on the stove. And I think that they thought if I didn't actually cook anything, that how could I screw anything up? It took me a year to be allowed to heat up something someone else had cooked and put it on a plate. And I guess if you want to talk about food history, when I watch something like, I'm thinking of something really mainstream like Jiro Dreams of Sushi, right? Where they wait decades to be the one to cut the fish, so to speak. There's a lot of that sensibility where I was working, just sort of like you need to earn it. And the only way to earn it is to not screw anything up and do the time. And that sounds fairly straightforward, but you'd be surprised in a 16-hour day how much someone who doesn't know a lot about food and didn't yet speak really perfect French, how much I could screw up. Yeah.
When you talk about that, and I was going to ask you about the kind of, was the US more liberated than France? Was it slightly more liberated than in the US than it was in France, or was it no?
Okay, Simon, if you insist. I think most of this is, can you do the job at hand, and how well can you do it? And then can we let the differences between me and you, whatever they are, gender, culture, age, whatever it is, let all that melt away when we collaborate. And it takes time. I will say Guy Savoy was unbelievably welcoming, and I think he just got such a kick out of me. It was sort of like this Martian that landed in the kitchen. And honestly, weirdly, years later, when I went to leave the restaurant, they said, "Can you make us a whole American meal?" And I said, "I don't know if I can do that. You guys, I feel like you guys are going to make fun of me." But these guys were coming in the kitchen with Mickey Mouse sweatshirts, holding a Coke and laughing at me for being American. And I'm looking at them like, I don't know, but chances are the joke's on you. So I made ribs, and I made chocolate chip cookie ice cream sandwiches. I made this whole giant American spread. It took me about a week, honestly, to find everything. And they just, there wasn't a crumb left. And they were all outside with their espressos and their cigarettes. And I thought, we might be onto something here.
American food is really delicious. Let's not forget that. American food, with its impact of Italian, but now with other impacts coming in from different nations, American food is really delicious, and it can be.
My daughter is much more interested in Korean food, Japanese food, Chinese food. Those are the things that are mostly impacting my daughter's choice of ingredients in cooking, which I find so interesting. But I would say there's some through line, Simon, between starting with Larry Forgione and seeing people like Jonathan Waxman, and then going and working with Guy Savoy. It's sort of like this deeply American and then deeply French. And then I came back and I started working for Danielle Ballou. And Danielle is really an example of a classic Lyonnais chef, right? The heart of France, the heart of French gastronomy. But then he's cooking with corn and crab. And so it was this interesting mix of kind of this hybrid Guy Savoy Forgione model for what Danielle's doing. Because I think Danielle's really making truly French-American food. It's gotten a little, I might say, Mediterranean now, but when I was working for him, it was really like France crashed into a huge, beautiful American farm.
I've eaten at his restaurants many times, and he is one of the greats. He is one of the greats, just as it has been in London, in fact, with Marco Pierre White and Gordon Ramsay and all the people before that. We had Escoffier before anyone else was doing it. Let's just talk about culinary schools, because I know you go and chat to culinary schools, which was very different, I think, to when you went. You did you went to work in a restaurant. You went to work rather than a 3-day here or a day here and I don't know which is better or which is, but I don't know. When I go to the CIA, they spend a lot of time, I always say, wrapping up their bouquet garni and putting it in, but it takes them 4 hours to do it, and it takes them 1 day to do fabrication. Yeah. And I don't quite understand that. And I just wondered what your thoughts were, because
Well, yeah. Cooking school's complicated, Simon. I think it's designed to make you fall in love with cooking, or that's my hope. And I think that in a lot of instances, it does successfully do that for a lot of people. I also think you have to do something really slowly at first, very well, and develop the good habit and know what good is. And then you can really go 90 miles an hour. So I think if you your training early on or your formative years where you learn those habits that stay with you forever.
Yeah.
If you're in a better place, whatever better, I think, is defined by what your goal is also, by the way. If you want to be a chef in a restaurant, you've got to, to my mind, that means years of line cooking. It does
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah.
And by the way, I don't care who agrees with me, and everybody has a different path. I know there are some chefs out there that are very world renowned, but some people have never seen them cook, and that's fine. And that works for some. I think ideally, yeah, tons of cooking over and over again, working with all different types of ingredients. I think that's the other thing that's really important. Okay, it's fantastic. Work in a vegan restaurant and do that for a year, but then go work somewhere where they're cooking large pieces of meat or giant pieces of fish. Work somewhere where there's a lot of charcuterie. Just maybe diversify the skill set. And then when you pack up your toolbox and you leave, when you unpack it to create your own menu, you've got this wide breadth of knowledge in a few different areas, and that really impacts what you end up producing yourself. And by the way, that takes years. So, and I don't know necessarily that we think we have to do all that time anymore. And I'm not convinced there's any way around doing the time.
Yeah, I've always been thinking, that's exactly what I've been thinking as a non kind of culinary, person who works in the kitchens. I watch it from the outside and I go, I know that this fish has come in completely skinned, in a bag. I know it. And that comes out because it tastes different, than getting a fresh fish. And I think that's something that we have to bring. Now we've talked about so many areas. Let's just talk about the point that we have in common, which is the Food Network, which is how I ended up on the Food Network was completely, we know Aidan Keller, we know all of these people who did them. But how I ended up was when I wrote a book and someone was listening to me on the food, on a show called The Word, BBC, and said, oh, we might get him in to see if he could do an episode of Iron Chef. And in the end, they said, well, actually, we'll get him to do the next Iron Chef, where I ended up doing, 12 episodes or something. And I go, how did this happen? As I stood next to Alton Brown and Michael Simon. And, for you coming in for the first time, you must have had the same. How am I here with Bobby Flay and all these people? So tell me about your first entry into it.
Yeah, I'm a little weird, honestly, because I really wanted to be on the show Iron Chef myself. I wanted to challenge an Iron Chef, but I wanted to be one from the very, from the second I saw the show. I just said, this is the show. Like people say, I want to be shortstop for the New York Yankees.
I don't know what that means.
Well,
what's is that basketball or?
The New York Yankees, the baseball team.
Oh, okay. I know nothing about baseball or basketball. Football as in using your feet, I know a lot about. Sorry, I don't know anything about
This is baseball. You need a bat and two hands. It's not dissimilar to cooking. So I just thought, I want to be on that show. I just picked it and I would watch it and I was jealous and I was grumpy and I was super jealous. I don't know how else to put it. Jealous, but not, not in a sort of homicidal sense, passively, politely jealous. And what happened? I spent 3 years trying to get on the show, and I finally got on and I challenged Kat Cora, and I was on it, and I just met Alton, and I think you and I sort of had a similar entry in this way, which was this unbelievable show. I mean, all of a sudden you turn around and there's Morimoto.
I know.
Right. And Alton's standing there and, old Bobby just, popped in because he's cooking tomorrow or whatever. So they asked me to do the next Iron Chef the first season, but I was unable to because I was giving birth to Ava. So I was so upset. I mean, I was really distraught at the thought that I couldn't. And I thought, this is my only chance. This is it. I blew it. But someone called me and said, come in and judge. You can sit behind the desk. We're not going to see. And I thought, well, am I really qualified to do this? But I went in and I just started talking about food. I think like you, I think that would, I would eat something and all of a sudden I was at the dinner table with my mother and I was 12 years old and she was saying, do you think the cranberry sauce is as viscous as it should be? And do you know that, these cranberries have more pectin than crab apples? That's kind of what my mother was saying at the dinner table. I thought everyone was talking, Simon, about the various pectin levels of fruit, but I guess not. So I got invited to do that again and again. Like you, they just kind of, hey, you free Monday. Hey. And I was like, listen, my calendar is wide open for this.
Yeah.
And so I did that for a while. And then I think they started doing Chopped. And they sent me the pilot episode in the mail, in a DVD and said, watch it and we want you to be on it. And I said, this show's dumb. Who's going to watch this show? I know, right? Yeah.
And how many episodes later?
Well, I mean, I've got to imagine it's past 1,000.
And can I just mention?
Yeah.
I've never, ever been on Chopped. Never.
Why?
I don't know. I will tell you. I have never, I don't want to cook, but I've never, ever, ever been asked to be a judge, ever. And I don't know why. It's just one of those odd little things, and who knows? But I've never been asked. Odd thing. But anyway, enough of that. But tell me, so you have Chopped, you have the next Iron Chef, where I know the first time I was judging you, and that's when we first met.
Yes.
That's when I told you your cooking was, you put something green in front of us. I still remember this.
It was awful.
I'm not going to criticize that, but it was, and I said it looked like you'd put Kermit in a blender.
Yeah, it was not my finest hour. It was your finest hour.
It was my finest hour, but that was when you didn't get through to the final.
Yeah.
And then the next year you went straight the way through. And I mean, you cooked for it, but we loved what you were doing. And I think you were with, what was her name in the final? Anyway, Amanda, of course it was. Amanda, and she was great. And she'd been cooking so well all the way through, but you got there and you took it. And I still remember your food then, and you were doing amazing things. And you made it through to the Iron Chef position. And that was, and you could tell in the way you looked, you could see in the way you celebrated that this wasn't a joke to you. This was really proper. This was the IGA's, the NIC, what do you call them? Sorry, ma'am. ICAG. It was so powerful to you. I remember coming down on that, and I saw it in your eyes.
Oh, but I mean, listen, Amanda, Elizabeth Faulkner, there's a whole group of us that it still means so much. But I won, and Bobby came over to me and said, the best thing about this is how much you deserve it. And I just thought, who talks like that? Who says something so simple?
Yeah.
And he said, you won, and no one can ever take this from you. He said, you won this. And I thought, I still, in moments of, we all have our moments, right? Where
absolutely.
You question everything. So
I remember, and I still remember that. And it's one of the finest moments for me as a judge to be able to go, look, this food is, quite frankly, it's perfect, with one or two little things and that's what it was. It was perfect. Now, what I want to ask is, how has your role changed then? Because it has. You've gone from being, the Iron Chef, and you get on there, but you've gone all the way through now. You've got 3 shows. You've got the Iron Chef. You've got, they're all, you're doing Tournament of Champions where you come on and judge. So first, how do you think, your role has changed there? And secondly, what do you think of the chefs who are now coming on to try and do? Are they similar to how you were, or are they trying to get on to be on television now?
I mean, when I started cooking, you couldn't pick food TV as a career. It didn't really exist, so I don't know that there was the temptation or the gravitational pull to say, oh, this is what I'm going to do. I would say some chefs are chefs that have worked in restaurants for a long time, and they're coming on the Food Network, and they're, like a genre. I think of us, Simon, as schools of fish. There's
Yeah.
the bass, there's the sardines, there's the salmon. It's just a school of fish, and you subscribe to the school you subscribe to. You just say, this is my camp, these are my people. I do think there are people that host, and I think then there are people that do a lot of competing and do a lot of judging the way I did, and then they graduate to becoming a host, or they move in a different direction. And I think the path is just not linear. I don't even know how you compare and contrast, because it's sort of like a giant bowl of fruit. There are a lot of, you can be a fig, you can be an apple, you can be a pomegranate, you can be a pomelo. It depends on what's going on. So
I like that. Maybe I'm a pomelo.
I love a pomelo.
Oh, me
Very
too.
floral. But I'd say it would be interesting to explore the trajectory of these chefs based on what they bring to the table when they come, or what their formative years were like cooking, and then how that translates into what they end up doing on TV.
Yeah, it really would.
Yeah, it's curious. And sometimes I see people and I say, gee, all I want is for them to cook. I see someone else and I say, gee, all I want is for them to talk about food. So,
We'll wait and see. Maybe I should do an episode and pick a number of them who I know from the, and just see how different they are. I think that would be an interesting one. Food. I haven't done food, a little bit of food television going back to the 50s of Julia Child, and even before her, going back, and we had this woman who was like Julia Child, but a bit more nuts, who was called Fanny Craddock in England, who was completely nuts, but used to cook in a tiara and was, and I always want to think what brought her into cooking. But anyway, well, first of all, I'm going to ask you some other fun questions. Hopefully these were fun questions too, but I'm going to ask you a couple of fun questions as well, as these. So, and I just want to say now, thank you for just being able to do this. This is an hour of your time when I know that your time is very precious. But let me ask you some of these just super fun questions. Now, if if Alex Guarnaschelli was a meal, and you've got so many meals that you've cooked, and they're so special. I mean, they are. But if you were a meal, what would it be?
You mean like with multiple courses and stuff?
You could choose a whole multiple course, or you could choose one dish, and you go, this is the dish that sums either me up, or it's the best, whatever you want. That's the thing. It is whatever people want.
Well, I mean, I could pick what's personal to me, or pick something that people know, because you have all those weird family things that people don't.
It could be anything, but it has to be. Yeah,
I'm going to say it's a cheese souffle from Diane Lucas, because my mother made this souffle and the oven door wouldn't close all the way because it was broken. So my mother put a chair in front of the oven, and the window was all grease stained, but I would sit in the chair and look through the chair, through the stained glass, smattered with grease from many a chicken. And I watched this souffle puff up, and my mother was fretting about the oven. And then she took it out, and I mean, it was hot, and she was shaking, and she just ran to the table like it was and I remember the spoon went in, and it made some noise, and we ate this. It was like an omelet, and it was funky like a barnyard, and it was acidic because she put a ton of dry sherry, and there was dry mustard, and she had put a whole wheel of brie, Simon, through a sieve without the skin to add. So it's a very complicated recipe. It has a million ingredients, but it actually tastes deceptively simple. And it's very puffy and warm, but deflates over time. And I'd have to say that's me. Just that. And a glass
Oh,
of a Gruner Veltliner with that ice cold. And then, that'd be it. No dessert. See you later. Maybe a salad, some frise, and some sherry dressing, but that's it. And I bet if you ask Jeffrey Zakarian, him and his love of souffles, he'd probably say the same. But that dish, it changed my life when I ate it. I don't know what happened. Something happened. It was never the same.
I wrote about Diana Lucas way back. We did that episode. We did Julia Child, Fanny Craddock, Diana Lucas, and one other person. And I wrote about. I can't remember who we wrote about, but those were the four. I said the four kind of original women in food TV, and Diana Lucas was just incredible. So that was when you start mentioning that, and I'd had some of her food. Well, not had some of her food; she was long gone by then. But some people created some of her food, and it was okay. If you were going to have any meal during history, or a meal at a particular point in history, what would it be?
Oh my God. Trying to extract myself from my parental history and not pick something that they would have really wanted me to be at. I've got to say, because I could have almost had it. Maybe I look at it that way. I want to eat something that I could have almost had but didn't. I'd like a really simple Tuesday night dinner with Julia Child and her husband at home, where she didn't know she was having any company. I'd like to know what a little, I'd like to have a fly on the wall pork chop dinner with her. And her
that's got to be that. Yeah. That's got to be just because I never met her. I never. But that's exactly the thing I would say. And it's, and finally, and this is an interesting one. Now, if you could choose any great invention in history, what would it be?
It might be a tie. And mostly because I go to this coffee place every week, and the gentleman, it's called Java Nation. It's in Bridgehampton. It's like unmarked, very unassuming. But inside, the gentleman is roasting all his own coffee. And he pours the coffee into the machine. And he says to me, do you know we're just burning sugar off this seed? And that's what coffee is. That's what he said to me 2 Saturdays ago. Wow. And I said, no, I don't think so. And people think it smells divine, because they're thinking that hazelnutty, wonderful. But the burning and the roasting doesn't smell like that. It sort of smells like a five alarm fire mixed with sugar. And so whoever invented the machine to roast coffee beans and turn something so wildly useless looking into this sublime drink that is God's nectar, number one. Number two, when I lived in France, I worked with Patricia Wells, the great food writer.
Of course.
We visited a lot of olive oil producers in Provence. Yep. And there's really very little olive oil. When you consider the global amount being produced, the amount of olive oil in France is paltry. But I was fascinated by their description of how they would crush the olives with the stones and then smear the paste onto these mats.
Yeah.
And then press down and then to separate the oil and the water by centrifuge. And I thought, who invented these mats that you smear crushed up fruit from a local tree on and then take out the liquid, decide what's useful and what isn't, and create olive oil. In this particular place, they also would use the water that they extracted from the oil, and they would water the trees with it. And I thought, this kind of full circle romantic, like I can't take it. I felt sort of stupid. Can't explain it. What have I been doing with my life when I could have been doing this? So whoever invented those little mats that they smear the olives on and then press to get the oil, those are my 2 immediate thoughts.
Well, I have to say, the first one, I'm allergic to coffee, so I'm never going to.
Oh, I forgot an oyster.
No, an oyster. So that's fine because I think it's one that. So I'm never going to. Now the the olive oil, when it was first, I think it was in Israel back in the day, back in, almost scriptural times, and they would push it through mats like that, and they would take the water and that would be used, but they would take the olive oil that came out and that would be used just for the anointment. It was really interesting.
I did not know that.
First of all, I do want to say at the end, let's just give your Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and Threads and TikTok and I don't know what else there is now. Perhaps you could just share who you are and all of those first.
Oh, I'm just at Guarnaschelli on all of those. So you can just, if you figure out how to spell my last name, which is worth enough, you can find me anywhere.
Okay, that's fantastic. And I just wanted everyone to know that, because you talking today, I hope will get even people who don't know you, because we have lots of people in different countries. They will want to listen to you now. But right at the end, I just want to say thank you. That was one of the most enjoyable thing I've ever had, and we've done 100 episodes of this show now.
I'm so proud of you for this. I love it. I can't wait to promote it and get more people aware of it, Simon.
Oh well, I hope you will, and that's great. We've done about 30 to 40% of them interviews, and then the rest is me writing essays where I kind of raw features where I just go, this is exciting. So I've written about corn. This time I've written about corn and cakes and the chicken, and they're really fascinating. But I just wanted to say thank you. Having people like you on here makes it credible. And I just want to say a huge, huge thank you. I mean, it really is.
I love it.
So thank you.
Send me all the info so I can promote it.
Well, I will. I'm going to send it to you, and please do. But I want to say at this point, Alex, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And I know we'll let you go now, but I just wanted to say again a huge thank you.
Anytime. I love doing it. You're so fun.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Take care.
Mwah. See you again.
Bye-bye. See you soon. Bye-bye. Make sure to check out the websites associated with this podcast at www.eatmyglobe.com, where we will be posting the transcripts from each episode, along with all the references and resources we used putting the episodes together, in case you want to delve deeper into each subject. There is also a contact button, so please do let us know if there are any subjects that you would like us to cover. And if you like what you hear, please don't forget to join us on Patreon. Subscribe, recommend us to your family and friends, and give us a good rating on your favourite podcast provider. Thank you, and goodbye from me, Simon Majumdar. We'll speak to you soon on the next episode of Eat My Globe. Things you didn't know about food. The Eat My Globe podcast is a production of It's Not Much, But It's Ours, and Producergirl Productions. We would also like to thank Sybil Villanueva for all of her help, both with the editing of the transcripts and essential help with the research.